Have you ever wondered why some generations seem to inherit a world of quiet stability, while others are born into a whirlwind of total transformation? It is a question that has puzzled observers of history for centuries, leading many to ask if the rise and fall of social moods is merely random, or if there is a deeper rhythmic pulse to the way societies evolve. Welcome to a reflection on one of the most discussed frameworks for understanding these shifts, the theory of the generational cycle, often referred to as the fourth turning. This concept, popularized by writers William Strauss and Neil Howe, suggests that history does not move in a straight line toward a distant horizon, but rather in a circle, repeating a set of seasonal patterns every 80 to 100 years. While many historians find the idea of predictable cycles to be a bit too neat for the messy reality of human events, the theory offers a fascinating lens through which to view our current era. To understand where we might be going, we first have to look at how this theory suggests we got here. It proposes that history is divided into four distinct stages, or turnings, each lasting about 20 years, much like the seasons of a year. The first stage is often described as a high, a period of strong institutions and social collectivism, where the memory of a previous crisis is still fresh. This is a time when society builds upward, focusing on the common good, even if it sometimes means individual expression takes a backseat. This is where the pattern becomes interesting. As the children of that stable era grow up, they often begin to feel that the very institutions that provided safety have become stifling or hollow. This leads to the second stage, an awakening where the focus shifts from the outer world of building to the inner world of values, culture, and spirit. Think of the mid-20th century, where a period of immense industrial growth eventually gave way to a decade of deep social questioning and cultural upheaval. During an awakening, the rules that once felt like a protective shell start to feel like a cage, and society begins to prioritize the individual over the institution. Here is where historians often disagree, as some argue that these shifts are simply the natural friction of progress rather than a structured cycle. However, the theory suggests that this cultural friction leads directly into the third stage, known as an unraveling. In this period, the authority of institutions continues to weaken, and individualism reaches its peak. People begin to feel more divided, trust in leadership declines, and the sense of a shared national or global purpose starts to fray. It is a time of great personal freedom, but also a time of growing anxiety, as the structures that once held society together appear to be weathered and worn. You might recognize this feeling in the way modern societies often struggle to find common ground today. This is the part that raises the biggest question. If an unraveling eventually reaches a breaking point, what comes next? According to this generational perspective, the final stage is the fourth turning, or the crisis era. This is described not necessarily as a time of doom, but as a period of profound transition, where the old, weakened institutions are finally replaced by new ones. The theory suggests that during a crisis, the stakes of every social and political decision feel higher, and the public mood shifts from individualism back toward a desperate need for community and order. Historically, proponents of this view point to massive turning points, like the American Revolution, the American Civil War, or the era of the Great Depression and World War II. Each of these periods involved a total breakdown of the old way of doing things, followed by the birth of a new social contract. It is a sobering thought, yet the theory frames it as a necessary clearing of the forest floor so that new growth can begin. Of course, it is important to remember that history rarely follows a perfect script. Critics of generational theory point out that it can be overly deterministic, forcing complex human events into rigid boxes that don't always fit. They argue that technology, economics, and simple chance play far larger roles than any repeating cycle ever could, yet there is something deeply resonant about the idea that we are shaped by the eras we live through. A generation that grows up in a time of crisis will naturally value security and cooperation differently than a generation that grew up in a time of unchallenged prosperity. This is where the pattern invites us to look at our own lives. If we are indeed living through a period of transition, it might explain why the world feels so much louder and more volatile than it did a few decades ago. It suggests that the friction we see today is not just a series of disconnected problems, but part of a larger process of social renewal. Whether or not you subscribe to the idea of a fixed 80-year cycle, it is hard to deny that societies go through moods of confidence and moods of doubt. Some observers notice that our current moment feels remarkably similar to the lead up to previous major historical shifts, characterized by a sense that the old rules no longer apply and the new ones haven't been written yet. This raises an interesting point about human psychology. We are a species that looks for patterns because patterns provide us with a sense of meaning in the face of uncertainty. Even if the fourth turning is more of a metaphor than a scientific law, it allows us to step back from the daily headlines and see the longer arc of the story. It reminds us that no era lasts forever. The stability of the high eventually yields to the questioning of the awakening, which leads to the fragmentation of the unraveling, and finally to the decisive transformation of the crisis. If this reflection has resonated with you, it might be because you can feel that shift in the air, that sense that we are collectively waiting for the next chapter to begin. The beauty of this perspective, despite its heavy themes, is its inherent optimism about the aftermath. If every winter is followed by a spring, then every period of crisis is followed by a new period of construction and renewed purpose. History may not repeat itself with the precision of a clock, but as the saying goes, it often echoes. Each generation is handed a different part of the cycle to manage, and perhaps our task is not to fear the change, but to understand our role within it. We are the architects of the next high, the people who will decide what values are worth carrying forward into the next era of stability. As we navigate these often confusing times, perhaps the most helpful thing we can do is remain observers of the pattern rather than victims of the moment. We can choose to respond to upheaval with a sense of historical context rather than panic. Whether the theory of the fourth turning is a literal map or just a thought-provoking compass, it reminds us that transformation is a constant part of the human experience. We have been here before, in different clothes and with different technologies, but with the same human heart, trying to build a better world out of the pieces of the old one. Thank you for taking this time to reflect on the cycles of history with me. It is a journey that requires patience and a steady gaze, but it is one that helps us see the bigger picture in a world that often feels too small. If this reflection resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.